Talk to Tom Owens. Talk to Tom Owens. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Town of Isle Planning Board for Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. Housekeeping-wise, if you're here to speak as a member of the public on any of the public hearing applications, there are yellow pieces of paper in the back. Please fill it out and have it brought up front. We'll call upon you to speak during that application. We remind you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. If you're making a presentation this evening, we remind you that applicants should keep their presentations to 30 minutes or less. We'll be keeping time over there, and Wendy will let you know when your time is getting close to running out, and she will let you know when your time has run out. That being said, would everybody please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First item on the agenda, site plan modification, public hearing, Jason K. Bria, Suncap Property Group LLC, SP 2022-020, west side of Orville Drive, 800 feet north of Church Street, Bohemia, 100 Orville Drive. Applicant requests landscaping relaxation in connection with a parking lot expansion for an existing industrial warehouse. Good evening. Thank you. If you have nothing further in the presentation, we'll do public hearing and then come back for questions. I don't have any cards. Did anybody come in and wish to be heard on the application? Not seeing anyone, I'm going to turn to Mr. Gonzalez to give a staff report. Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This ITD zone 11-acre site is currently improved with the 157,000 square foot FedEx warehouse. Main frontage is on Orville Drive to the east with another curb cut to the west on Lakeland Avenue. As explained by the applicant's representative, the proposal before the board tonight is to expand the existing parking lot on the west side of the site to accommodate additional vehicles, as well as expand the truck parking closer to the rear of the building. The applicant's team has stated there is a lack of employee parking on site, especially during the busier months and overall for the operation, causing employees to park on grassed areas. As a result of this, these areas have become unsafe, and as a stopgap measure, gravel has been put down to provide safer driving, parking, and walking conditions. This area would become more parking for employees should the application be granted with paved parking lot. After initial discussions with staff, the applicant's team has revised the original site plan to break up the large proposed expanse of asphalt to the south. Landscaped islands are now proposed as end caps for each parking aisle for the new expansion. Bisecting islands are provided running north-south, connecting to those end caps, and additional islands are included along the eastern boundary. As this area is partially visible from Lakeland Avenue near the curb cut, this will provide a better aesthetic from the public right-of-way, as well as more greenery and shade on site for the new area. The significant benefit is keeping the expanded parking area from being a singular asphalt pad with no green space woven throughout. Staff did review the most recent site plan and recommends decreasing the stall lengths from 20 to 19 feet, which is standard. This will increase the bisecting landscaped island widths from 6 to 8 feet each and allow an additional foot of landscaping to the east for the proposed snow storage area along that parking row. These figures must be finalized. However, it'll add approximately over 800 more landscaping feet than currently shown on the plan. In order to accommodate the increase in standard parking stalls on site from 206 to 299, overall landscaping would still be decreasing from approximately 17.99% to 14.06. Front yard landscaping still exceeds the minimum requirement. So based on the above, staff recommends the board grant the application subject to the standard conditions with additional stipulations as follows. All new plantings will be subject to engineering division approval during site plan review. New parking stall lengths and aisle widths be adjusted per the staff report, and the submission of mitigation fee for the proposed reduction in landscaping at $5 per square foot. And that's for the current reduction, not the overall reduction. The final amount will be determined based on the revised site plan per the staff report changes.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Just be clear, the conditions that Mr. Gonzalez just stated, you're in agreement with all of them? And that includes the shortening of the stalls. You're not waiting on something to evaluate that. You're going to go ahead and do that, correct? Okay. Mr. Moriarty, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gerard, just one question to Tanner. How did we arrive at the $5 per foot calculation for the mitigation fee? Is that standard, or is that something that's unique to this project?
So the $5 per square foot is what is on the fee schedule for the town. That is the same exact fee that major subdivisions pay when they don't meet the 25% overall landscaping. They would pay the $5 per square foot of whatever they're not providing. So this is now being applied to the commercial application. But
Okay.
It is on the fee schedule.
All right, thank you, Tanner.
Anything further from the board? Anything further from the applicant? Is there a motion? Mr. Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, subject to the CNRs being executed and subject to the planning staff verifying no emails in opposition have been received. Otherwise, the board reserves the right to reopen the application and request the applicant to address the emails received or questions received. Temporarily, the staff has no emails, and that's why, in the purpose for that motion. And the motion was to grant.
So it's a motion by Mr. Brown,
subject to the CNRs being agreed to, as well as the email issue that he raised, that the motion is to approve the application, close public hearing and approve the application. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Frugieri. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, 5150 Veterans LLC, PB 2022-026, west side of Veterans Memorial Highway, State Route 454, 311.02 feet south of Broadway Avenue, Holbrook, 0 Veterans Memorial Highway. Applicant requests 2 planning board special permits for a warehouse use and overnight parking of registered vehicles in the Industrial Corridor District pursuant to 68-466.1B and E, respectively. Applicant also requests a waiver of the cross-access requirements as outlined in 68-466.3B. Site plan modifications are also requested as part of this application. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members of the board. VBV and I presented at the October 26th Planning Board meeting regarding 2 special permits and 2 minor site plan modifications. Both the staff and this board commented favorably on said requests and the development in general. There was one condition included that the owner agreed to offer permanent cross-access and shared parking in perpetuity with the property owner at 5140 Veterans Memorial Highway, Holbrook. Said easements and agreements shall be filed with the office of the Suffolk County Clerk. Given the fact that the neighboring parcel is a gas station and the adjacent lot contains monitoring wells, we do not believe it makes sense to offer such cross-access. We believe this poses safety and traffic concerns. Further, on November 17th, after our October 26th meeting, we received DOT approval for this site plan, which included 2 curb cuts on Veterans Highway. We believe this cross-access will be burdensome for our industrial use. Further cross-access for a neighboring gas station with the movement of tractor trailers and other industrial vehicles could pose a safety concern for both our site and the neighboring gas station. In general, such cross-access would hinder the feasibility of this development. We are requesting that this condition be removed from the site plan modification conditions dated 10/26/2022. All other conditions are acceptable as is.
Thank you. I have no cards. Did anybody come in and wish to be heard on the application? Not seeing anyone, I'm going to go to Ms. Wozniak for a staff report.
This application was heard at the October 26th Planning Board hearing where the applicant was granted a special permit for a warehouse and overnight parking of trucks. At the hearing, it was brought up that the special permit requirement outlined in the code requiring offer of cross-access between adjoining parcels wasn't feasible. Unfortunately, the board couldn't grant the waiver at the hearing because any waiver of special permit requirements has to be advertised in the call. So tonight, the applicant is officially requesting that waiver. Given the nature of the adjacent parcels as a small gas station and a water authority property, which is the site of a water tower, it's unlikely there would be substantial traffic from the gas station going to the new warehouse building and vice versa. There's also not a substantial indication the water authority property would be redeveloped in the future as a use that would warrant such cross-access. It's also important to note that there will be a sidewalk installed along Vets that would still allow pedestrian access to the gas station for warehouse workers who may wish to visit that site. Based on this, planning recommends the board grant the waiver, subject to the same conditions presented at the last hearing, but removing the requirement for that cross-access and replacing it with the waiver. This would be the first waiver of such requirement in the ICD. So if the board feels future development cannot accurately be predicted, planning could draft a condition that if either adjacent parcel gets redeveloped and the town feels cross-access may be warranted, then this application could be brought back before the board as a discussion item to determine its feasibility.
Thank you. Questions from the board? The CNRs have been agreed to with the modifications, Ms. Wozniak?
I didn't get the revised ones, but everything from October 26th is fine. I didn't get any email with any revisions.
Just the one that Ms. Wozniak, the only change is the one you just mentioned, correct? Is there a motion? Mr. Matamore, is that your hand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the discussions just held, I would move to close this public hearing and grant the application as presented.
This motion by Mr. Matamore to close the public hearing and grant the application would be subject to the same condition with the email system that was stated in the first application.
Yes.
Is
it's
there a
acceptable.
second to that, Mr. Bruno? All in favor? Opposed? It's granted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Item 3 on the agenda, planning board application public hearing, 62 West Main Holding LLC, PB 2022-027, south side of West Main Street, State Route 27A, approximately 77 feet west of South Park Avenue, Bayshore, 62 West Main Street. Applicant requests a planning board special permit for a restaurant in the business district pursuant to 68-257.1I. Applicant also requests planning board special permits for a bar and outside seating and bar service accessory to a bar pursuant to 68-257.1M and N respectively. Site plan modifications are also requested as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the applicant, Steve Bertolino, 130 West Main Street, East Islip, New York. Just for the record, I've handed up, I apologize for not getting it to you sooner, just handed up the parking study, which we were able to finalize in the last week or so. I gave an original plus 9 copies for the board. With that being said, it helps me with the elephant in this application that we need to talk about. Two of the big issues here is we have no parking, and we need 196 spaces. So it's a big relaxation. Number 2, landscaping. We virtually have none. We have less than 1%. So the lot is about 8,800 square feet, and the building's about 8,600 square feet. Doesn't leave much room. Building is in downtown Bayshore, as this board is well aware. It's been there for well over 50 years. It was rebuilt approximately 1989. And for the last several decades, it's been known as South Shore Outdoor Apparel. First floor was like the retail operations, if you will. The second floor was designed and being used as the manufacturing end. So with that being said, the use is being changed from, let's say, retail manufacturing to restaurants on the first floor. The second floor is currently remaining vacant at the moment. We don't technically have a tenant at this point, but we're proposing it as an office use. And the big thing on this application is the proposed expansion of the rooftop. So this site is adjacent to, and this was news to me, I didn't know the name of this park, the George King Park. It's got the gazebo in it, as you may recall, coming into Bayshore from the west. This building has a drab facade on the west side. It's not really much to look at, so you kind of just blow right by it. But we're looking to change all that. And as you can see in front of us right here in the first row, we have the elevations. And starting off to your left, you can see the elevation on the Main Street side of the building. So I want to focus on all the positives that this application has now that we've gotten rid of the landscaping and the parking. And you can see the improvement that this building will have on the facade. We're using multiple materials, different colors, different types. And I'm going to ask you to come over to the right here, the second from your right. You can get a view of the west elevation of the building. And you can see that we're adding 3 banks of windows, both on the first floor and the second floor. And of course, these will be glazed rated windows for the uses that we're proposing in there. This particular side of the building is right on the lot line. There's really not a lot of room to move or play or to add much in the terms of depth of the facade. So that being said, we're kind of limited to what we can do, but we're trying to make the best of it. My understanding is that some conversations were had with the planning department with the hopes of maybe getting an easement for an encroachment into the town park. For whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be viable. So we really don't have a lot of room to change that facade. But obviously, as you can see from this rendering, this is a big improvement from what's there now. And we're hoping that you see it the same way we do. And then lastly, to your right, which is...
Mr. Bertolino, if I could just stop you there 1 second.
Sure.
I was speaking, the president of the Chamber of Commerce reached out to me regarding, I guess, bricks being added to that site. Was that a discussion you guys had with her? Is that something that can't be done or can be done? Or?
I personally did not have the discussion, but my understanding is, yes, a discussion was had. And if you look closely, right here on the bottom, you can see about 2 feet of brick putting on there. And, you know, I don't know if the Chamber of Commerce was looking to have a full brick facade, which I don't think that would really look as good as what we're proposing here. We're certainly willing to work with the planning department to come up with something different. But as you can see, we're using 3 different colors, 3 different materials. And once again, we do have this issue with the depth of the building. Because we are literally right on the lot line, there's not much we can do to add on to it. Now, sure, we can always turn our heads to an inch or 2 here or there, but we can't build this facade out, 6 inches to a foot.
So my only point is if, in fact, planning staff does have some requests on that, you'll work with them, is what I heard from you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So now, drawing to where I want to be, right here on the right side. So this is fairly new. I mean, it's not new across the country, but it's kind of new to Long Island, getting a little bit of speed as it goes along. And my feeling is when the bay is choppy next summer, I want to be up on that roof deck having a nice drink, and maybe some other people in the town of Islip will be there too. It's a larger roof deck than what you may have seen within the town
Bertolino,
before.
can you send it up here as you're speaking about it? Just
You wanna-
start it at the end. They can take a look at it. Thank you.
So this proposed roof deck is where the expansion of the building is taking place. It's approximately 2,050 feet, and it's not going to have a dance floor or anything like that. It will have a bar. It will have some restrooms, 2 restrooms up towards the back. We will be adding 2 fire escape staircases, if you will, one in the front and one in the rear. Both of these stairwells that are being added to the height of the building will have tapered edges so that your line of sight looking from either Main Street or in the rear from Gibson, you really won't see like a stark rectangle sticking up. Of course, it will be there, but we're going to minimize that change in sight. In addition, we're going to be expanding the elevator shaft. The elevator shaft will be extended so that the elevator that exists in the building will rise up to the 3rd floor or the roof deck. So all in all, you will have 3 points of ingress and egress going to that 3rd floor area. With respect to, what we plan to go on up there, the idea is on the 1st floor, we have 2 restaurants. One is not signed a lease yet. We're working on that. That may even be owner occupied, if you will, if you want to use that term. And the other side, we do have a lease in place for a ramen place, a ramen noodle place. We anticipate having both restaurants, perhaps, if not at least the new one that has not signed the lease, having access to this roof deck. It will be separate, and obviously the business end of it is not here for discussion tonight. But with that being said, we want to have this space as open, available. It's open air. It's very different than what you might see, and it's the ideal spot for it. When you come into this beginning of Bay Shore, where all the restaurants and everything sit, you will see, people sitting up top, looking down over into the park. We don't really see that there will be any change in the overall character other than it's beautifying it. Everyone's got their own opinion of what's nice and what's not. Personally, I think this is a great addition. I think it's long overdue to downtown Bay Shore, and we're actually hoping that we might even get some water views from that. Now, there is a canal or a creek right on the opposite side, and that would be the goal. So between the park, Main Street, and the water views, we hope to create a nice environment for the residents of the town of Islip to enjoy. Lastly, on the south side of the building, which I don't, in front of me, I don't have the facade, but it's just a back facade. I want to take a time out at this point and point out to the board, my clients, the applicant, Carlos and Gilbert Cintron, own the 2, there's actually 2 larger buildings and a smaller one to the east, creating this little block, if you will, of buildings. They own all of them. They've experienced, I spoke to them about this in particular, they've experienced, well, let me backtrack. Mr. Cintron's, the Cintrons own and operate the animal hospital that's right there. They've experienced no issues with parking on any of their buildings, either the ones they occupy or the ones that they rent out. There are apartment complexes upstairs. There was a former little supermarket of African foods and things of that nature in there, and there's been no issues with parking at all. However, on the back of the building, the reason I'm leading into that is we're changing the entire rear of the building layout. On Gibson Street, we're going to be adding a garbage refuse or container site, probably in the middle of the parcel, and that's going to accommodate the refuse containers for all 3 of those buildings as you go in. We will be working with the town DPW. We're actually going to be cutting out some of that sidewalk and creating a bump out that you can see on the plan. So the sidewalk will actually move to the south a little bit to accommodate a new electric transformer, to accommodate the refuse area. And we will have the curb line right on the line of the roadway, if you will. We would be seeking an easement from the town to put in some grease traps. These grease traps will run linearly from east to west. They will be located just about on the back side of the park. They will not be encroaching on park property. And then lastly, as part of the application, we will be needing an electric easement. It will be subterranean. It'll run from Montauk Highway through the park property. It'll be directionally drilled to the back transformer, which will be sitting on Gibson. So the largest part of this transformation of this building will really happen where, I don't want to say you don't see it, because Gibson is pretty well heavily traveled, especially if you're going to Toast. But it's going to happen on the back side of the building, and it's going to happen on the top of the building. We're not really changing much on the interior other than uses. And that brings me right back to parking. So I've submitted up the parking. The uses do require the 196 spaces. That includes the roof deck, it includes the first floor, 2 restaurants, and it does include the now vacant second floor, which we're submitting as though it would be used as office. Traffic study points out that, sorry, I need glasses to see these days here. Traffic engineers, R&M, believes that it's going to increase 117 newly generated parking vehicles, but that would still bring the local area of the parking fields up to about 85%. So in short, everyone on the board is familiar with how these traffic studies and parking studies work. They do a synopsis of different days, different times of the week to see when parking is available, when it's not available. And I need to point out, this was delayed a little bit. One of the reasons you didn't get it is the study. I have another application that'll be submitted soon, and it's across the way on the other side of Main Street. Those 2 applications were considered within this report for good reason. We didn't want to submit a report to the board and say, hey, by the way, look what we're doing at this property. And then you see me 2 months from now talking about another property across the street, and you say, you know, Mr. Bertolino, how much of this can we take? So with that in mind, we had to redo the parking study to make sure that, you know, we weren't misrepresenting anything to the board in that regard. But I'd like to point out on a personal note, when I visit Islip, and I now live in Islip proper, and I do frequent Bay Shore all the time, I park my vehicle once, and I might go to a restaurant, and then I go to a bar, and if that bar's got nothing going on, I go to the next bar, and if I don't like the ball game on in that bar, I go to the next one. I personally, and maybe you have too, I've parked once, and I've visited 3 or 4 establishments. So if my clients are willing to spend millions of dollars, which some of which they've already done acquiring the property, and many dollars more revamping the property, taking the risk that this walkable downtown community that ISIP is trying to create is going to work for them, and the parking studies show that we can accommodate more parking, I would submit to the board, you know, grant the application. We're not changing the character of the neighborhood. We're not changing what's going on already. And if our clients can't come and patronize this property because they can't find parking, well, then shame on us for spending all that money and not being able to park there. I mean, in the end, you know, this board and the town board is going to be faced with lots of applications, people doing things. I've been here before for downtown Bay Shore. Parking is an issue. When a parking garage gets built, and I don't think it's if, I think it's when a parking garage gets built, maybe these applications will become easier. But the elephant in the room that I started with is where I'm ending off. The parking is an issue. We recognize it. I'm telling the board that we're taking the chance, and it's not a small chance. This is a big investment that my clients have made. As you can see, it's a beautiful rendition of what we want to do. If this board sees fit to allow us to do that, I think the parking should be a non-issue. And with respect to landscaping, as with many buildings in the downtown area, we don't have landscaping. And that's what happens when you create a downtown. It's, you know, you don't want to call it a city just yet, but we're creating a little mini city of Bay Shore. And quite frankly, when you have a city, you expect people to walk, leave their cars at home. And brings us to the next point. I have lots of friends that don't even take their cars into Bay Shore. They Uber. They say, I'm not taking the chance. I leave my car at home. They Uber in, they Uber out. So we need to start thinking along those lines. I mean, some of us have been doing this a long time, and it's parking, 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 but we've got to look past that, I believe. I do have my engineers here, the architects, and I do have the parking people, the traffic study from R&M. If the board has any questions, we're all here to address them, and I leave you with that.
Thank you. I do not have any applicants who want to speak on this. Anybody come in later who wishes to be heard? Not seeing anyone, I'm going to turn to Ms. Wozniak for, oh, somebody wish to be heard?
Yep.
Come on up. Just come on up. Please come on up and state your name for the record. Thanks for catching it. Ma'am, just the microphone and just state your name for the record, please.
I'm Mrs. DiMartino. I live at 21 Ocean Avenue, Bay Shore. On the, I have Gibson is back to my property, and this thing that he wants to build is going to be on top. So that means music at night and people talking and bartending and everything else. Aren't the people in the community going to be affected by that?
We'll ask that be
We're
addressed.
being pushed further and further. The parking space that I have there is right next to my house. I'm starting to have people at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning making sounds and having drug rehab things and all that going on. And I think that's going to add to it.
Thank you. Anybody else who wishes to be heard on this application? Not seeing anyone else, I'm going to go to Ms. Wozniak for a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subject property is located on the south side of Main Street, adjacent to the Gazebo Park in downtown Bay Shore, and it's currently CO'd as an industrial building, and it's unsure if there are any active tenants. Tonight, the applicant is looking to renovate the entire building, which will include substantial facade improvements. The proposed plan shows one restaurant, one bar on the ground floor, office space on the second floor, along with rooftop seating and a rooftop bar. The total number of seats between the restaurant and the bar will be 271, and the total parking for the building required is 196. The proposed development, where although the uses are compatible within a downtown area and the facade improvements are a major benefit to a prominent building on Main Street, this is a significant increase in the use and parking demand of the current use of the property, and there have been growing concerns regarding the oversaturation of Main Street and strain on available parking. It is also important to note that this is the first application to propose a rooftop bar and substantial number of rooftop seating. Seats alone on the roof are 116. The outside area is permitted to operate until 2 a.m. as per the zoning code, and with the outdoor area on what is essentially the third floor, this could pose noise concerns as there would be potentially over 100 people on the roof at any given time, and there's no noise mitigation measures that you may have on a ground level like adjacent buildings or cars parked on the street. Any outdoor space wouldn't be able to have outside speakers, and outdoor live music would be prohibited here. Based on this, planning recommends the board reserve decision to allow staff time to review the submitted traffic study, draft appropriate conditions, and take a look at that side elevations, or if the board feels the standard conditions for bars and rooftop seating is okay, then we could move forward with that.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Brown?
Oh, yes. First of all, Mr. Bartolini, you addressed a lot of the questions I had about the project ahead of time, which was the one staircase going up and down. I saw that you put the fire exits on, which that was a problem I had with it. The elevator going up now to the rooftop was another issue I had, which you answered that question. Restrooms on the third floor now, or the rooftop, was another issue that I had that you answered. The no music, the woman that came up and asked that she's concerned about music being played. It's a town code, I believe, that you cannot have outside music. And I think that would be part of the conditions that you would agree to, correct?
Mr. Brown, not only would it be part of the conditions, I can speak right now, we will not have any live music up there. And, just speaking with my client about this specifically, listen, we can stand here and say we'll never do it, and then I can see somebody having a christening and they play a little music. So I kind of want to refrain from saying, well, they'll play no music. We will not put up any large speakers, and we would also, commit to a 12 o'clock closing time. We don't want people up there at 2 o'clock in the morning disturbing the neighbors. And as you can see, I answered this question that you're posing without going back to my client, because we've anticipated this. Mrs. DiMartino has legitimate concerns. We recognize that. We're not looking to create, a discotheque on the top of the building. We're looking to, when we say bar, different people have different connotations, Mr. Brown, of what a bar is. Some people go to a bar and sit there quietly. Other people go to a bar and get rowdy. We're not looking to have this rowdy
If
bar.
On your application, the site plan that we saw, there is no dance floor. There
No.
is no that. It's comfortable seating around.
And we would covenant to that. We would put that in, there will be no bands, there will be no DJs. Of course, some people may play a little music now and then, and we would agree to close early. We would
Well,
agree to
I
12.
think the music has to go. I don't know specifically, I don't remember what the town code is with the outdoor music, but whatever the town code is, we're going to roll with. So, and that would be part of the covenants and restrictions.
Understood.
The hours of operation, you said it would be midnight?
Yeah, we would propose midnight. I mean, we obviously feel, some bars are open until 2, 3 and later. But we think, we're asking for something new here. We recognize that. And we think it would be appropriate to limit the hours voluntarily to something more reasonable. And we think midnight is reasonable. I know, some code ordinances speak of 11 p.m. We think that might be a little bit early, but, we think 12 o'clock is a lot better than 2 a.m.
Right. Now, walking the area, I would tend to agree with you as far as, I think you're going to draw customers from other neighborhood. So I don't think it's going to increase the population on a given weekend night. I think you're going to, you have a very good project. I think you're very successful, but I think it's going to draw from other businesses on Main Street. People are going to move around, like you said, you do. Also, walking across the street, across Main Street, there's a huge municipal lot that's behind there. And me personally, coming from Union Boulevard, I live in Sayville, and coming to Bay Shore, I always go into the back lot, and I'll walk across Main Street to whatever restaurant I'm going to. So I think that alleviates part of the problem.
Well, Mr. Brown, I park in that same lot, although sometimes I cheat and park at Belford and Norris because you don't have to pay. But that being said, there's also a large lot by Mr. DiMartino, which is on Gibson, that's almost underutilized all the time. And everybody wants to get further to the east, and they don't really utilize that westerly parking lot. So I agree. I mean, I know so many people that frequent Bay Shore. And as I said earlier, I mean, they don't drive there at all. And of course, as everyone knows, all these new apartments, it's going to be a walkable community. You bring in 500 apartments that's coming in from TriTech or 487. Those people don't need to get in their car to drive there, but they need to go somewhere to eat.
Yeah, and the only other concern I have, which is not really, it's a mild concern, is that if you go into Patchogue, there's a restaurant in Rum that has the top floor, which I think is a much nicer application than that one is. You don't even know what's up there as you drive by on Main Street. Do you have any plans and everything for shades or umbrellas or anything like that up there that would be noticeable from Main Street?
I've got to defer on that one.
Hi, my name is Nick Pfluger, Bolo Pfluger Architects, 85 East Main Street, Bay Shore, New York. We do have a covering, a permanent covering over the bar area. Other than that, there's no other coverings except, of course, for the exit stairs, the elevator, and bathrooms. In terms of umbrellas, we did envision that there may be some umbrellas, local umbrellas for the tables, but we don't anticipate that those sort of components will really be visible from the street, where you're not really gonna feel like there's a party going on up on the roof when you're at the street level.
All right, and I think there's a sight line that from the street, if you keep them beyond that point, you wouldn't even see them.
Yeah, it being a two-story building existing, and you being on the street, right next to the building, it'd be very hard to see what's on the roof. Across the street, you might get a little glimpse of what's going on up there, but again, not much.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Further questions from the board? Mr. Bruno?
With all due respect to Board Member Brown, I have a different opinion on this project. I'll be quite honest. It appears to me that your client has obviously, without a doubt, taken all the things that they want into account. And, let's spend as little money as possible on the things we don't want. let's take what we want, you know. You say the rooftop community, that this is a new thing we've introduced. Even though we have no parking for anything else that we have, we'd still like to put 116 seats because we'd like that. You've decided, or it's your proposal to, because you need to accommodate them, to narrow Gibson Street because you need it, okay? And when asked by the community to deal with the side facing the park, you're explaining that you can't build it out, but we agree you have 4 inches for brick, and yet your answer to we'd like a brick side, you were so cooperative as to give them 2 feet of brick. The bottom line, Mr. Bertolino, is the way I see this is way too much, in my opinion, that you're asking for, and way too little that you're willing to give to get there. So I just want you to be aware. You were I thank you, I mean this sincerely, for the clarity of your presentation. And I mean that sincerely because I understand the project in total. In the areas where you're not concerned, you're painting it. Okay, again, I'm saying, and I understand, I've been in the private sector, I understand your client wants to spend their money in the things that they think are important, but I'm saying all I see is a lot of taking here and very little else that is going to be gained by the Bay Shore community. Thank you.
Mr. Bruno, I obviously, you and I, or this board and I have done this dance many times on many projects, and I do appreciate your concerns, and I certainly don't look upon the board and say everybody's looking in the same glasses that I am or that each other is, obviously. That being said, I respectfully disagree with you. I didn't come back and say we're not going to brick this side. You know, we had a request recently, by the way, we had a request about putting some brick on the side, but we had already proposed putting that 2 feet. If this board or the planning department felt in its wisdom that an entire brick facade should go up there, I mean, that's something we would certainly consider and go back and forth. But no, Mr. Bruno, you're an architect. I know your background. Do you really think that the elevation we're showing you would look better if it was just one solid color of brick going from top to bottom? I mean, we can work with you to do that.
It's not, you would like this to turn out to be just about the look of the building because that's easy to do.
No, I'm going to address
I
the other
agree
things.
with that. No, it's not so much how I feel about the brick. Let me be very clear about that. It's your client's attitude towards it that I find disturbing. Okay? In other words, it was asked for, and renderings in these things is relatively easy to change, especially something like that. So all I'm getting at is, let's go back to, as you've put it, and it was clearly the elephant in the room, is 196 parking spaces. And I found it very interesting when you said people are starting to choose to Uber to downtown Bay Shore. Why would that be, Mr. Bertolino? Could that be because they can't find parking spaces? That's my concern, is that your client is looking to take a building that has no parking and not use it for, I'm going to use the word typical use, okay? It's not a retail. I mean, I realize as an industrial use, it never had a high parking count. That's understood, okay? But something retail or whatever, your client is actually not only trying to use it for one of the highest parking counts that are required in the town of Islip, but they're saying, you know what? And 2 floors is not enough. We'd like to use the roof too. And to me, this is just too much of an ask. Certainly at this point, I want you to be aware that I'm not all that convinced, and hopefully that's helped you to understand at least why I feel that way.
It does, and I don't need to have the last word, and I don't want to do a tit for tat, but I would be remiss if I didn't address your concerns, all right? So, you know, speaking of, as we say, the Ubering, you know, I know firsthand, I have good friends that are my age, mid-50s. They don't need nor want to drive to downtown Bay Shore. And, you know, I can talk to my daughters who are in their 20s and early 30s. They don't even think the way we do. It's Uber. We are not creating the Ubering into downtown. I personally don't believe it's being created or happening because of a restaurant or lack of parking spaces. As I said with Mr. Brown, I have never had an issue finding a spot pretty much at any time of day or night in downtown Bay Shore. And I've lived in Islip now for the last 2.5 years, and I've never experienced that, day or night. Maybe someone else has. And my personal experience, as I conveyed to the board about, I won't call it bar hopping because it's not what it is, but you do go out to eat and you say, let's go get a drink across the street. And then you go to the next place. There isn't an outdoor arena in downtown Bayshore for someone to sit outside and really take in what Bayshore can have, which is the views. Unless you go down, when I say downtown, you can go down to the lake house. You can go down, by the ferries and get a drink or a fat fish or wherever you want. But in the village, this is new to the village. We admit that, and with respect to, we can't give you the parking. The parking is an issue and everyone's going to have that issue. And I recognize it, which is why I brought it up. With respect to Gibson Street, I did bring out that my client owns the other 2 buildings next to it. We don't have a viable refuse container. And this isn't just done, with the strike of a pen. As you know, there's back and forth with planning and what can we do and how can we make this work for everyone? And what we're saying is for this use to occur, this is what we can do. My understanding is the planning department was, I won't say, against or in favor, but was certainly willing to work with us to accommodate what we need and didn't have an issue with it. Obviously, you're free to differ, but we're not, I don't want to say being flippant or cavalier and just saying, hey, we want this. No, we want to work with the town. We want to work with the planning department and the board to find out what works for everybody. And if you or any other member of the board has a concern, we'd like to address it. And if you feel that it's not something you can support, obviously we have to accept that. But overall, I would hope that the majority of the board feels that this is a good application and they give us the approval when the time comes. Thank you.
Further questions from the board?
I have a question for Mr. Bertolino. I missed what was going to happen on the second floor. It sounded to me like it was offices, but I'm not sure what it was.
Mr. Matamore, yes, the second floor, from what I understand, was the old, we'll call it manufacturing warehousing, where South Shore maybe did the screens, printing on the shirts or whatever they did there. It's currently vacant, and we've proposed it on the plans. More than likely, it will be office. We're not anticipating putting apartments in there. We obviously don't, especially hearing from Mr. Bruno, don't think we should put another restaurant on that floor, which is going to have the most density for parking. So that being said, we're not just proposing office. We believe that that is the most viable use of that particular space.
Okay. I just have a few other comments. I'm very familiar with the site. I have relatives on Ocean Avenue who lived there for many, many years. And I was around when the DDD was put in back in the 80s. And this is sort of the first step of something like this with outdoor seating and the like that is in view of the canal, as Mr. Bertolino pointed out, and the bay. And it's a big step. I get that. I'm very familiar with that parking lot. And of all the parking lots along Gibson Street, it's probably the least used, in my belief anyway, most of the year. Unfortunately, and we all suffer with this, the ferries overflow ends up in there during the ferry season. That's another problem that the town wrestles with all the time, and probably your client will wrestle with. But I see this as a continuum from the DDD in the 80s to bring Bayshore back to viability. And this is part of that. Now, it doesn't mean that Mrs. Martino's rights to quiet and the like should be ignored, and they should be mitigated in any way, shape, or form they can. She is the number one most affected neighbor, real estate neighbor to this building. So with that in mind, and that's a challenge to your client and to the planning staff, that I think I, for one, so far, and we're not going to vote on it tonight, but so far, it's an exciting application. I think it does a lot of the things that you mentioned that were mentioned in the 80s. Uberism and people walking to the establishments in Bayshore, not driving. Well, that was more of a pipe dream and a vague prediction in the 80s. We're starting to see some daylight with regard to that. I don't know still if it's going to work completely to everybody's satisfaction, but it was an attempt to bring Bayshore back economically. And that is happening as we speak. So we're very conscious of carrying on that continuum into the future and bringing Bayshore back. I love what you're doing on the Gibson Avenue side, and certainly when you drive Gibson Street, it's the back of the stores. Well, if that can be improved, Bayshore is going to improve dramatically on Mechanicsville Road and Gibson Street. So the ideas are all good. Not that my colleague, Mr. Bruno, doesn't have some points, but that's why we're going to reserve decision tonight and see what we can work out that's acceptable to the town and the planning staff and acceptable to your client. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Ms. Cruz, did you have something?
I just wanted to say that I have gone to a rooftop in Patchogue, and it's a little bit smaller than this, and it was nice. We ended up not being able to go in because it was packed, and they had a swing set that my kids wanted to sit on for lunch. But I do like the idea. Maybe you could work where there's not that many seats and figure out a way to put some sort of, maybe moving the bar away from Gibson so that maybe that can help with the sound. I'm not sure, because I saw on the rendering that you had that the bar was placed towards the back. Is that the bar back there?
Ms. Cruz, if I can interject, no, the bar is probably dead in the middle.
What is that is that an awning? What is that?
Yeah, but
That,
your viewpoint is looking from this perspective, so you're losing the depth behind it. But it's pretty much smack in the middle, if I'm correct.
oh,
And we did that for the reason, which was this is one of the areas on the rooftop that will have an overhang, if you will, or a roof, right?
Right.
So you have the commodes, you have the bathrooms, you have the elevator shaft, you have the stairwells, and then you have the bar area.
in the middle, okay.
In the middle. So that is in the middle, and not only is it in the middle from front to back or north to south, it's relatively in the middle from east to west. Not that anybody can see it from the east because there are buildings there, but coming from the west, you look up, you really shouldn't see that roof, from line of sight as you're looking up.
Right.
So we feel that we've hidden, if you will, that bar area.
All right, so I just feel that I do like it, the rooftop, but the
Nope.
parking is an issue, and if there's a way to mitigate the sound for the neighbor, I would look into that as well.
Two things. One, there'll be no swing set. And number two, not trying to bribe you, but
Ma'am,
if we get approval, we'll make sure you get in.
any further questions from the board or comments? Ms. Bertolino, just a couple of questions. So sort of what Ms. Cruz said on, certainly the number of seats outside may or may not be concerning to me once we have an opportunity to review what the engineering staff has said in terms of your report. But what is actually going to be in the back along Gibson Street then? So if that's in the middle, what is behind it?
So are you talking on the site itself or on the roof?
On the
deck?
roof.
On the roof, in the back corner on the east side, you have the. So this is your staircase. This is the elevator and the staircase. This protrusion, this you can call it a buttress that's sticking out. That's there already. All we're doing is going up a little higher on that, and then you can see. A little closer, and I will speak louder. So what you can see here, there's no structures in the southwest corner of the building. This is where the line of sight would be where it was on Ocean Avenue or on Gibson Street. You really should get the front lines to do that. And then you overhang this front. The overhang going over the bar is pretty much in the center.
Yeah, that answers the question, yes. I also just wanted to bring up, I know Mr. Brown raised the issue and said whether the town code said the town, and you said you certainly would say no live music, but you're not willing to say no music, but the town code does say no outdoor loudspeakers of any kind. So
I don't want to say we're not in agreement there. I want to be
you
clear.
have to be in agreement, it's the town code.
Here's what I don't want to say. I know how things work. We will put in the covenants. There will be no live DJs. There will be no live bands. But in this day and age, I mean, I see kids walking around with their phones. They walk around with these tiny little boom boxes and they play things. We will put a stop to that as best we can.
Mr. Bertolino, so now I'm agreeing with Mr. Bruno on this. I mean, this is, the town code says what the town code says. For you to say, well, we're not going to put a stop to it, we're going to try the best we can. Again, if the town code says it, I'd like for you to say that we support what the town code says.
We
We're going to follow
support
the
no,
town code.
Mr. Friedland, we support no music.
Okay.
We will have no music up there.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. The town code says it's not something we're asking for. It's not a condition. It's what the town code says.
And we will abide by
Okay.
the town code.
That's would be
How's
the
that?
appropriate answer. Yes. Yeah. So I think it's possibly I like the use. I like what you want to do there. I do think that the number of seats on the rooftop, as Ms. Cruz said, if we're permitting 100, it's going to be 150 or 200 that show up top, and that's what the reality is going to be. It's going to get loud. I'm happy to hear that you're willing to cut back from the 2 a.m. time, midnight time, or something like that is very good as well. I just would ask that planning staff, and my other concern certainly is also the Gibson Street lot on the south side, which is a free lot, becomes overly packed as a result of this. And maybe that's a separate issue in terms of whether that one should be metered or something else. So they park on the north side, which is a much bigger, expansive lot. But I think it's a good application. I think there are some issues that need to be ironed out and worked out to make it work, is my opinion on it. I'm not 100% against it. I'm not 100% in favor, but I think it can be worked out, is where I end up tonight. But I would want some time for the planning staff to review the report that we just received from you.
Understood.
Mr. Frugieri.
Yes, Mr. Bertolino. We've focused a lot during this hearing on the rooftop. It's a novel thing, but at the end of the day, it is going to be a seasonal use. So it'll be used maybe 6 months of the year. And then the second floor, you're proposing office space. I want to hear more about the restaurant on the first floor. That's going to operate 12 months out of the year. Is that going to be a true restaurant, or is it going to be a restaurant/bar that's more bar than restaurant? Can you tell me a little bit more about the restaurant that's planned for there?
I can. I can. So I'm limited because I don't eat ramen. Not that I don't like it. I just don't know what it is.
Oh, it's a ramen noodle place.
Yeah. So one of the establishments that's already leased, it's already tenanted, is a ramen place. That's about 40% of the first floor, and that's done. Now, as you know, from going almost every restaurant, even Denoy, as small as Denoy is, still has a little bar.
Yeah.
They still have a place to serve. So we can't say there'll be no bar. But to answer your question succinctly, the westerly portion of the first floor is going to be a restaurant with a bar. Now, that is going to be primarily a restaurant, and it will have a bar. But it's not going to be, a bar, a sports bar. We're not looking to be a Finley's, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way.
No.
If you know the bars that are, up and down, some are more restaurant with a bar, and Salt and Barrel, if you will, right? Some are more restaurant with a nice bar, and some are bars that you go to watch the game and get rowdy. This is proposed to be a restaurant, and I never want to misspeak to the board, but I can tell you, we are in lease negotiations for that other space. And part of those negotiations do include owner-occupied. So there may be a collaboration between a third party and the owners. So when I speak to you about it being a restaurant, that is what's going on there.
Okay. One of my concerns in reviewing this application is going to be that restaurant uses on the first floor, that they are, in fact, more restaurant than bar. The ramen place is excellent. I've never gone to a ramen bar before. But the other spot of it, I like to see that there's, as far as square footage, there's more restaurant than bar.
I can give you those details if
No, I don't need the details
Okay.
because we're going to be reviewing this. I just
Fine.
wanted to make that point.
I can assure you it is more
Yeah.
restaurant than bar. And forget about square footage. It's designed to be a restaurant,
Okay.
primary
Yeah.
use.
Planning will work on that when they're working on conditions. But we focused an awful lot tonight on the rooftop bar, and that's only part of this application.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
Nothing further. Just obviously appreciate your consideration and time.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Mr.
Rajari.
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we close this hearing and reserve decision on this application to give planning time to work out appropriate covenants and restrictions. And that's it. Motion to reserve.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
That's only what we approved.
Can we just leave the public hearing open for several weeks to check the emails?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll amend that and not close the hearing. We'll leave it open for how long do we want to keep it open?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, 14 days, so that we have an opportunity for emails to come in.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Motion by Mr. Frugieri to close the public hearing. Oh, sorry, leave the public hearing open for 2 weeks and reserve decision this evening. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Matamore. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, we're reserved. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Next application on the agenda, planning board application, public hearing, KCE NY 29 LLC, PB 2022-028, southeast corner of Rabbroad Drive and Wheeler Road, State Route 111, Hopog, 220 Rabbroad Drive. Applicant requests a planning board special permit for a Tier 3 battery energy storage system pursuant to 68-456F3. Applicant also requests a waiver of fencing requirements as outlined in 68-456G in order to permit a visual and sound barrier wall instead. Site plan modifications may also be requested as part of the application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the ICE Planning Board. John Anzalone for Harris Beach PLLC, 333 Earl Ovington Boulevard, Suite 901, Uniondale, New York, 11553. Attorneys for the applicant. Sure, Anzalone, Anzalone.
And can you just speak into the microphone or pull it down a little closer?
Sure.
So that, thank you.
Is this better? Sorry. I'm here with respect to Key Capture's Energy's application for a special permit for a Tier 3 battery energy storage facility, and there's a special permit criteria waiver of the fencing requirement to permit a wall instead at the property located at 220 Rabbroad Drive, Hopog, New York, which the applicant is in contract to purchase. As a matter of housekeeping, the affidavits of mailing and posting were filed prior to tonight's hearing. And right now, I'd like to issue, file, I should say, additional proofs of mailing together with a handful of exhibits, particularly resumes and two exhibits.
We'll make them part of the record. Thank you.
Thank you. As indicated in the plans filed with the application, the development of a battery energy storage facility, or BESS, will also include the development of a project substation. A utility-scale BESS connecting to LIPA's high-voltage electric grid requires a project substation with a main power transformer to increase and decrease the voltage of the energy leaving and entering the BESS. The voltage will change between the power conversion system's voltage and the voltage of LIPA's transmission system. From the substation, the project will interconnect with the existing substation located directly north of the property across Rabbroad Drive via underground connection. A utility-scale BESS must interconnect with the existing power grid. This requires that a BESS be proximate to high-voltage transmission lines capable of distributing power. This necessarily limits the locations of such facilities. Further, where there are no existing substations proximate to a BESS development, a point of interconnection substation, a second substation, also known as a POI substation, is required as well. Here, because of the location of the property next to an existing substation, a POI substation is not required. Further, a BESS is best suited to be located as close as possible to existing load centers to eliminate the need for future transmission upgrades, which would be funded by LIPA's ratepayers. This project here is sited near a substantial load center of the Hopog Industrial Park and will directly benefit the local grid for reasons that will be detailed shortly. For these reasons, the project site is particularly suitable for the proposed BESS. Before I go into the project's compliance with the town's special permit criteria, I would like to turn the presentation over to Phil Denera of Key Capture Energy to give some background on his company's experience in developing, maintaining, and operating BESS facilities, as well as to describe the proposed use, operation, and technology utilized this facility. Bill?
Thanks, John. Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Phil Denara, D-E-N-A-R-A. I'm a Senior Manager of Development for Key Capture Energy. As a brief introduction, Key Capture Energy, we go by KCE, is a developer, owner, and operator of utility-scale BESS with the largest operational project in New York, our 20-megawatt facility, KCE New York 1 in Stillwater, New York. Headquartered in Albany, KCE is a startup New York business partnered with SUNY Albany. We're committed to supporting New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA, and the Public Service Commission's order establishing a statewide energy goal of installing 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025 and 3,000 megawatts by 2030. Governor Hochul recently announced a goal to double this goal to 6 gigawatts by 2030 during her State of the State address in January of 2022. Long Island's electric grid is rapidly changing in preparation of expected wind and solar generation, and the retirements of aging generation plants. The local grid will need fast-responding, flexible solutions like battery storage to accommodate these changes. There are a number of technical reports which evidence the value of battery energy storage to the grid, but I'd like to reference one in particular. That is the Long Island Fossil Peaker Replacement Study prepared by Strategy Consulting LLC on behalf of the New York Battery and Energy Storage Technology Consortium, also known as New York BEST. The report examined operations of Long Island's aging fossil fuel power plants that operate primarily during peak times and found that it is feasible and cost-effective to replace more than 2,300 megawatts of Long Island's 4,300 megawatts of fossil fuel peaker plants with energy storage over the next decade. It is also found that approximately half of the peaker plants, around 1,100, could be retired and replaced with energy storage by 2025. The remaining 1,200 could be replaced by 2030. In conjunction with New York's plans to increase solar energy efficiency and offshore wind resources, over the next decade, fossil peaker plants could also save life of ratepayers as much as $393 million and contribute to significantly reducing harmful air pollutants. Utility-scale lithium BESS, such as a system, utilize battery cells similar to what is found in electric vehicles. These cells are arranged into modules, which have sensors to monitor real-time conditions, such as temperature, voltage, and state of charge, within the enclosed system. These modules are placed in racks that are built into containers custom designed for the needs of a BESS, including sensors, communications and control equipment, and specialized fire detection and suppression equipment. I, as Senior Manager of Development, lead a team developing a number of projects throughout New York. But this is a coming home moment for me because I was actually born and raised in the town of Islip. I truly feel that this is a great location for a project that will do a lot of good to support the integration of renewable energy and a resilient and reliable grid. And I'm looking forward to supporting our community's transition to clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. At this time, I'd like to actually submit a copy of the strategy and report just into the record, just since Phil referenced it particularly.
Thank you. We'll make it part of the record.
Thank you. With the exception of the wall for which a waiver is being sought and will be discussed separately, the project complies with the standards in the town code for BESS facilities and the town's general special permit standards. All on-site utility lines that are proposed to be underground that connect the BESS to the substation, as well as that connect the project substation to the LIPA substation across Rabbro Drive. Except when necessary to service the project, there will be no on-site lighting utilized, and the lighting will comply with all town standards. The site plan will comply with the 10-foot separation between the BESS equipment and vegetation. The project will maintain existing mature street trees and vegetation to the maximum extent feasible. The front yard, particularly along Wheeler, where a 50-foot wide planting area will be provided, will have substantially more vegetation than presently exists at the property. Overall, 32% of the property will be vegetated once the project is completed. The project will provide all required signage, a commissioning plan, decommissioning plan, and emergencies operations plan, and all equipment will have the necessary certifications. The site is zoned Industrial 1, which along with Industrial 2 and the Industrial Transition Zone, is one of only 3 zoning districts in the town that permits a battery energy storage facility at a utility scale, obviously subject to this board's approval in all cases. As previously noted, the site is particularly suitable for its use given its proximity to existing substation, transmission lines, and a load center. Further, the site is of sufficient size that such a facility can be designed so that all Industrial 1 bulk area criteria can be satisfied and all landscaping requirements met. In addition to the considerations dictated by the electrical grid and the property zoning, the property was also selected given its relatively flat topography, allowing for minimal regrading and proper drainage, and the absence of wetlands or critical and sensitive environmental areas. The project is also far less intensive than was permitted as of right. After construction, the project will be unmanned and controlled and monitored remotely during operation. The project will generate approximately 1 vehicular trip per month for routine maintenance. Thus, it will not create a traffic or congestion hazard. The project only requires water for establishing and maintaining on-site vegetation. The project involves no production of refuse nor generation of sanitary discharge. The project is compatible with the neighboring uses. All parcels in the area are zoned Industrial 1 or Business, with the exception of the parcel to the south, which is zoned General Service C. The project will be set back to the south by no less than 50-foot wide vegetated side yard setback at its closest point, with the majority of the boundary between the property to the south and the subject site having substantially larger setback. The project will directly complement the existing substation located to the north across Rabbro Drive, as previously noted. As with this parcel, and based on discussions with the Town Planning Department Engineering Division, the larger front yard setback is proposed along Wheeler Road because it is the far more heavily trafficked roadway, as Rabbro Drive in this area is a dead-end area serving an industrial park. This allows for significant landscaping to screen the use, as will be discussed shortly by the project engineer, Joel Richardson. The project has been designed in accordance with all applicable life safety codes and engineered to allow for first responders to access and maneuver about the site in the event of emergency. Further, it should be noted that since 2009, the town is a climate smart community. By resolution dated April 4th, 2009, the town board set forth, among other goals, to reduce greenhouse gases, establish energy efficiencies, and encourage renewable energy. In April of this year, the town supervisor in their State of the Town address recommitted the town to these goals, and as they are now seeking to become a Brown certified climate smart community. This project furthers these goals. As Phil noted, obviously we have a rapidly changing electrical grid. We need these new solutions to satisfy the incoming on wind energy that's being brought into the system, as well as the replacement of peaker plants, which are high polluting. And the project will also enhance power grid reliability by providing ancillary services, particularly voltage uplift to the New York System's independent systems operators. The project will also involve benefits to the town. These include the more reliable power grid for the reasons that myself and Phil noted, the pilot agreement through the ISLIP Industrial Development Agency that will result in increased real property taxes. Further, the construction will employ union labor to construct the project, which the construction will take 8 to 12 months for this board's reference. Concerning noise related to the improvement is limited to the liquid cooling pump for the battery energy storage system modules and the medium voltage conversion system. This is addressed by the proposed sound wall that was designed in accordance with the sound study that was filed with the town. Through utilization of the wall, the project will be compliant with the town's noise ordinance. At this time, I'd like to offer Joel Richardson, a professional engineer of H2M Architects and Engineers, to walk through the site plan, including the location of the wall and the proposed landscaping to screen the wall and on-site improvements. A copy of Joel's resume was filed at the start of this hearing. Joel, can you please go over and identify yourself?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Joel Richardson. I'm a civil engineer with H2M Architects and Engineers. So as John began presenting, the site is 6.5 acres. It's currently developed with a office building and appurtenant parking, drive aisles, utilities, drainage improvements. The intent of the project is to demolish the existing building, remove all the existing improvements that are associated with the office building, and develop it with the best development, which it consists of 276 battery units, 35 power conversion system units, project substation with a main power transformer and a control building. And we've included a perimeter wall, 12 foot tall visual and sound barrier around the BESS and the project substation. Pavement within the perimeter wall will be constructed out of RCA or crushed stone. Drainage systems will be installed consisting of catch basins and dry wells that are in conformance with the town's drainage criteria as well as New York State DEC drainage criteria. 2 curb cuts are proposed along Railroad Road. The 2 existing curb cuts that service the office building will be removed. As John had mentioned previously, there's very minimal traffic associated with this development, on average 1 vehicle trip per month for scheduled maintenance. There is a sound barrier proposed around the perimeter of the BESS development and the project substation, 12 foot tall. It's set back 50 feet from Wheeler Road, 25 feet from Railroad Drive, 25 feet from the adjoining industrial property to the east, and minimally 50 feet from the adjoining property to the south. In fact, the majority of the setback of the visual and sound barrier is significantly greater than 50 feet to the property to the south. There's significant landscaping improvements that have been proposed to enhance the existing street trees. There's 16 street trees along Wheeler and Railroad that will be maintained and enhanced with new plantings. The plantings consist of a mix of deciduous and evergreen trees, shrubs, native grasses, and perennials. As John had mentioned, the the larger and more substantially landscaped setback is along Wheeler Road, which is far more traveled. It matches the wider setback for the LIPA substation that's north on the north side of Rabro Drive. The intent of the landscaping design was to mitigate the visual impacts of the sound barrier and to soften the appearance. This is achieved with a diverse mix of plants, as I had mentioned previously, and utilizing different strategies along different frontages. We propose natural plantings that are consistent with the surrounding area. Along the west barrier wall along Wheeler Road, the planting is most varied since this side will be viewed to drivers most frequently. Along the north barrier of Rabro Drive, the existing street trees will be enhanced with the existing street trees, and the proximity of the sound barrier create a shade condition. So we've proposed to supplement the existing street trees with shade tolerant flowering trees and shrubs. The east barrier is primarily visible from the neighboring property to the east, and we've proposed a mix of plantings that can fill in the narrow space between the adjoining parking. And again, the south barrier provides the greatest opportunity to have a variety of plantings, and we've proposed a variety of evergreen trees, deciduous trees, and ornamental grasses, accompanied by other shrubs and perennial plantings. As you can see on the site plan, we've identified the various plantings around. I also have visual renderings of the site after development that I'd like to share with you. So this is a view from the intersection of Rabro and Wheeler, looking southeast into the corner of the development. As you can see, the main thing that's visible from this view is all the additional planting, the existing street trees that have been enhanced with the additional planting. You are able to see the sound barrier behind, but the intent of the plantings was to soften the appearance of that and draw the attention away from the sound barrier. I have two other images. The printing came out a little bit washed out. I'll share them with you, but the intent from the other angles is largely the same. This is a view further south along Wheeler, looking north towards the intersection with Rabro. Again, you can see in this view a lot of the existing street trees that have been supplemented with evergreens and other deciduous plantings along the side of the sound barrier. This is again looking at the intersection from a little bit further west on Rabro, just to give a different perspective of the overall impact of the development.
Thank you, Joel. And for the record, all the images that Joel shared are in the enhanced environmental assessment form that was filed with the town. So we conclude that there are several bases in support of this application. Battery energy storage facilities are limited in where they can be located. It's based on the existing electrical grid, and the property is uniquely suitable for such a facility given its proximity to existing load centers and location near an existing substation and major distribution lines. The improvements will have a minimum impact on existing public infrastructure. Once in operation, it will be unmanned and will generate will not generate daily vehicular trips nor on-site parking. There will be no water except for maintaining the vegetation, no septic or sewer service required, no population density added, and all drainage will be retained on site. The project was designed to utilize existing vegetation to screen the project from budding roadways as much as feasible. Finally, the proposed project represents the application of green technology that not only conforms to LIPA and the town's goals for energy efficiency, but also conforms to the Public Service Commission's order establishing energy storage goal and deployment policy. On behalf of my client, we thank you for your time and attention, and we are, of course, available to answer any questions this board or the public may have.
Thank you. We don't have any cards. Anyone coming to wish to be heard on this application? Not seeing anyone. I'm going to turn to Ms. Wozniak for a report, then we'll come back for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This 6.5 acre industrially zoned site is located on the southeast corner of Wheeler Road and Rabbroad Drive in Hauppauge, and it's improved with the large building originally CO'd in 1981. The applicant is proposing to demolish the building and construct a 150 megawatt Tier 3 battery energy storage system comprised of 276 battery modules within containerized enclosures, 35 medium voltage transformer and inverter units, a 448 square foot control building, and new underground transmission lines that will connect to the existing LIPA substation directly to the north. The BESS containers will be approximately 8.5 feet tall. Inverters next to the containers will be about 9.5 feet tall, and the tallest structure on site will be the lightning masts at about 55 feet tall. The site improvements will include 50 feet of landscaping along Wheeler Road, 25 of landscaping along Rabbroad Drive, and a 12-foot sound barrier wall surrounding the entire compound. The landscaping and sound barrier wall will screen most of the operations from view. However, the lightning masts and some of the other taller structures located on the northeast portion of the site will still be visible. It is important to note that as the vegetation along the street frontages matures, the masts and taller equipment will be less visible, and that the prominence of the structures are not out of place given the LIPA substation across the street, which has similar equipment. The location of the taller equipment was also optimally located in the northeast portion of the site, furthest from Wheeler Road and the assisted living development directly to the south, which will also have a substantial landscape buffer. This is the first BESS special permit heard by this board, as BESSes were a recent code amendment added this year, allowing these systems in certain zoning districts based on the aggregate energy capacity. This application falls into the Tier 3 category, which requires a special permit from this board, along with compliance with other standards as outlined in Chapter 68, Section 456. The applicant is proposing to meet all these standards, which includes requirements for a commissioning and decommissioning plan, as well as safety standards. The only waiver the applicant is seeking is the waiver outlined in 68-456G, which requires the facility to be enclosed in a 6-foot fence with self-locking gate in order to prevent unauthorized access. The applicant instead is proposing to enclose the facility with a 12-foot sound barrier wall, which could be seen as a visual improvement as well. The wall will be tall enough to screen the battery enclosure and will also provide noise mitigation. It is also important to note that this wall will be located behind the landscaped area as mentioned above. A chain link fence will also still be installed around the western and southern perimeters of the project. The facility operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. Operations and maintenance will include daily and weekly remote inspections, plus monthly, quarterly, or yearly on-site inspections. The proposal does outline a possible augmentation of the system, which would consist of adding new battery containers and medium voltage power conversion systems. The proposal also outlines that the project noise levels will not exceed the town's nighttime residential noise limit of 50 dBA at the property line. It will also not exceed the town's nighttime commercial or industrial noise limits at the property line. It was estimated that the background noise of the project would increase approximately 1 to 3 dBA at residential receptors, well below the standard of 10 dBA, which would suggest noise mitigative measures be executed. It's also important to note that this project is ideally located in a mostly industrialized and commercialized area. Based on the above, planning recommends the board grant the application and waiver requests, subject to planning working out conditions with the client that would further enforce requirements outlined in the zoning code. You require superior landscaping along street frontages and to the south, keeping as much mature vegetation as possible. require the exterior face of the sound wall to be decorative in nature, and require a specific decommissioning plan for this plant, not just a generic plan. It might also be noteworthy to limit the number and height of the proposed battery energy containers to ensure that any future modifications that are a substantial increase in operations or change to the proposed site plan be brought back before the board for evaluation, or if the board would like to see the conditions before we could bring it back. It could be reserved tonight. We could bring it back for a decision.
Thank you, Ms. Wozniak. I'm going to go to Mr. Brown.
Oh, yes, I did hear you say that there's no on-site employees, correct?
Yes.
But there's daily maintenance?
There's not daily maintenance. No, it's about once a month. There's physical maintenance. There's daily routine maintenance, well, monitoring, I should say, not maintenance, and that's done remotely.
Okay, and the batteries themselves, so the maintenance is just once a month for the batteries?
Further, Mr. De Niro.
So yes, the batteries themselves, as well as the power conversion system, which is a medium voltage transformer and inverter, as well as the substations equipment, is all supposed to be long lasting and built to be durable. But we will have a battery management system, a BMS, which is being fed real-time data and analytics, which is monitoring temperature, voltage, state of charge, inert gases within the containers. And then we have a 24/7 operations team, which is actually dispatching the project into the market. So we're telling the system when to charge and when to discharge from the grid. So we will have real-time analytics at a very granular nature for the project. But the way that the project is designed is proposed and meant to be unmanned, which is obviously valuable for the purpose of traffic,
Okay.
but also most utility scale infrastructure. The goal is to not need regular maintenance. You want it to be
Okay.
durable.
Now, is it a maintenance team that comes? Is it one person?
It'll depend on the type of maintenance, but it'll typically be, between 1 to 3 people, and they'll be doing preventive maintenance. So checking the dielectric fluid levels within the transformers, checking that all of the electrical cabling ties are still clean, all the bus bars, there's no corrosion, other standard electrical infrastructure testing and monitoring that you would do for the project.
Right, and what is the life of these batteries?
So the system is proposed to be operable for about 20 years. I would like to note that it was mentioned that there would be augmentation of the system. This is essentially because, as you can imagine, like your cell phone, batteries degrade over time. That's obviously dependent upon how often they cycle. But essentially, to maintain our energy capacity at the AC point of interconnection, we need to augment that system over time. So the site plan that you will review is actually the proposed development at the end of 20 years after the system has been fully augmented. At COD day one, there will actually be a number of pads that will be left undisturbed. And then we'll essentially be bringing additional containers every 3 to 5 years, and then pulling the electrical wiring through all the already constructed underground conduit and connecting those to the medium voltage converters to augment the system over time.
Okay, now you did mention that you have a 12-foot sound wall. Is that around the complete site where the site is secure?
It's around the proposed development and equipment.
So
but
the
there are
site is
setbacks.
secure?
Yes, yeah. There will be egress for emergency purposes and sound rated as well, but it will be around the proposed
Right,
development.
that's a locked gate that we're talking about, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Ruggiero.
Yes, LiPo PSC&G had an RFP out for battery storage facilities. Is this a project and this location was selected as part of that RFP process, or is this a spec build?
That's still confidential in nature at this time, but I will say that we do plan to contract with either PSC&G Long Island through this current or future bulk storage RFP, as well as potential contracting opportunities with NYSERDA.
Okay, so then you don't have a power purchase agreement with the host utility at this point?
We do not have an executed power purchase agreement at this time.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and one other question. You mentioned in your presentation a pilot. Were you saying that you do not have a pilot, so you'll pay full taxes?
No, what I was saying is that we would negotiate a pilot with the the town, and that would be higher than the existing taxes.
Higher than the existing taxes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right. Because the only reason why I asked that is because you're not generating any jobs. Typically, the IDA benefits are predicated on job creation.
Yeah, there's been other municipalities have approved pilots for battery energy storage and other renewable energy uses under the premise that the renewable energy is beneficial to the town as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bruno.
Yeah, this one might be for Mr. Gonzalez. During her report, Kelly had mentioned that the lighting masts at about 55 feet tall. Does our lighting code permit that?
To my knowledge, the maximum height of any light poles in the town is 20 feet to the bottom of the fixture per the zoning code.
If I may clarify, those were proposed lightning masts within the project substation. There will be 3 of them total at a height of 55 feet. And this is in order to comply with triple IE standards. So that's essentially International Electrical Engineering Code that requires, certain grounding for high voltage equipment. So that's the purpose of the lightning masts.
It just, they were, lighting. Oh, it's supposed to be lightning masts?
Yes, the lightning masts at a height
I have
of
them as
55
lighting.
feet. Sorry.
That's why I asked the question. Okay, yeah, that would make a little more sense. Yes, thank you.
Hey, Mr. Mattermore.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. The facility that's on the northeast corner, which it looks like it's maybe related to what you're going to do, is that in service now? And is that something that you will hook into? Is that the understanding underneath Railroad Road?
Yes, so we will connect to LIPA's existing 138 kV King substation via an underground 138 kV generation tie line, which will connect our main power transformer to LIPA's high voltage grid. So essentially what we will be doing is taking energy at 138 kilovolts, bringing it to our main power transformer, which will then ramp down the voltage to 34.5 kV. And then there will be underground conduit connected to the project substation, which is then all underground routed to our power conversion systems, which are our medium voltage transformers and inverters. Those will then ramp down the voltage one more time from 34.5 kilovolts to 13.2 kilovolts and change the power from alternating current, which is how energy flows through the high voltage grid, to direct current to ensure a low voltage safe DC routing of the energy to the batteries.
Okay, so that I find interesting. I appreciate you explaining that. But is the facility or the equipment that is now located just to the north, is that in use now, and is it generating power at various times of the day or the season or whatever?
It's transmitting power. It's not currently generating power. So it's a portion of LIPA's high voltage electric grid.
Okay, and you will eventually hook into that? Is that accurate in explaining it that way, that those two will be hooked together? It'll be one facility, not two?
No, it'll be 2 separate facilities. So essentially we'll be working with 3 separate parties. It'll be ourselves as an independent power producer. It'll be PSE&G Long Island acting on behalf of LIPA as the transmission owner. And then we'll also be working with the New York Independent System Operator, the NYSO, which is a nonprofit entity that manages the New York's wholesale energy markets. So we'll actually be buying and selling power through the NYSO wholesale market, but potentially contracting with PSEG for that power. And it'll be 2 separate projects. LIPA owns their electric grid. We are simply connecting to that electric grid. And in order to do so, we need to tie to that grid with high voltage infrastructure.
Okay. The second question, is there something comparable, let's call it, here on Long Island that we could take a look at that's similar in nature to what you're describing?
To a certain extent, it is worth noting that this is definitely nascent technology. Battery storage is relatively new within New York State and elsewhere. But we have currently the largest operating project within the state. That's a 20 megawatt facility in Stillwater, which is just outside of Saratoga. We also have an operating project in Orange County. That's a 3 megawatt project contracted with utility Orange and Rockland. And essentially that project is what's called a non-wires alternative. So Orange and Rockland had identified thermal overloads on their grid. And instead of rate basing, so charging their ratepayers money to upgrade their transmission system, they identified that battery storage was a cost-effective solution to mitigate those thermal overloads. So we built the project on behalf of Orange and Rockland. And to answer your question, yes, there are currently two operable battery storage projects on Long Island. One is in East Hampton, and the other one is in Montauk. The major difference is the scale of the projects are much smaller. They're 5 megawatt systems, 40 megawatt hours, and they're also in buildings. Our proposed development is in a containerized solution, and that's for a number of reasons, including safety. The industry at large has moved away from containerized solutions because of the risk of thermal runaway and fire risk.
Thank you.
Just two questions for you. What is the actual sound level at the site itself?
The results of the sound study that were performed as part of our expanded EA are included in our expanded EA. I don't have the copy of the expanded EA with me right now, but all of the sound levels at the perimeter property lines are within town code requirements for noise levels. For the noise ordinance.
But the sound level on the site would be what?
Within the
Yeah,
inside
correct.
the sound barriers.
What's the sound that it's generating?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't have that information right now, but I can get it and provide it to you.
Okay, that'd be good to get that information.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, but it won't have the. It does, but it won't have the model input data that was used. Isn't there? I'm not quite sure.
you can
Yes.
certainly get it together and submit it in writing afterwards, or while you're looking for that, can I ask you about a decommissioning plan? I know there's reference to one in what you submitted to us, which was a model. Is there one been created for this site?
We have not created a site-specific decommissioning plan, but what you have in front of you is generically what would be proposed. But obviously, there needs to be more specificity there. But at a high level, the containers would be lifted back onto a truck and brought to a decommissioning facility. The battery racks themselves would be removed from the containers. Then all the battery cells themselves would be isolated and brought to a recycling center. But we do obviously need to incorporate more specificity into the decommissioning plan.
I mean, certainly the town code requires one, but it's our first one. I would want to see one and make sure that possibly it's even referenced, that decommission plan of that date in the CNRs, especially if ownership changes, and that they're responsible for that as well.
Absolutely. I would imagine there's some sort of decommissioning bond as well associated with
Say
the
that again?
project. I would imagine there's some sort of decommissioning bond associated
There
with
is.
the project.
There is as well. Yes, it's required in the code. Requires the plan as well as the bond.
All right, so thank you, John, for providing me with the information. So it's a little bit of an odd question to answer directly because if you're immediately adjacent to the sound generating sources, such as the main power transformer, sound levels are higher. In general, though, the most
What's your loudest spot on the site?
is 75 decibels.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need. Yes. Simple question. Wasn't looking for anything out of the ordinary. I just wanted to know the answer.
Understood.
Are there further questions from the board? Anything? Oh, Ms. Cruz.
My quick question is, who monitors the site? Is it somebody local, somebody in some other place upstate? Who's monitoring the site for somebody to jump the fence or since nobody's on site with these batteries?
Yeah, sure. So we will have some sort of security detection and motion sensors on site to notify our team, and that'll be sent to local emergency responders. With that said, for what it's worth, there's really nothing that you can break into with this site. It's all high voltage infrastructure. All of the containers are enclosed and locked. The medium voltage and transformers and inverters are pretty standard in what you would see today. I can't imagine that anyone will want to break into it for any reason except for.
Crazy times. that's all I'm
Yep,
saying.
there are crazy times though, and there will be security motion sensors or something similar to
And
activate.
who monitors that? Where-
We have, it'll be integrated into our battery management system, our SCADA system. And there's a 24/7 remote operations team. I can't state specifically where they will be located today, but either somewhere in New York or elsewhere, but they would be able to immediately communicate with local emergency responders.
Any further questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant? I would just ask if we're going to reserve the decision tonight, if you would get that answer back to Ms. Cruz in terms of where it would be monitored from. Is there a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Oh, Mr. Brown, I just looked at you.
okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion that we keep the hearing open for 2 weeks to allow, in case there's any emails that we have received that we haven't been able to open yet, and reserve decision tonight, so we can work on the decommission plan that we can see, and work on the CNRs for the site.
It's a motion by Mr. Brown to leave the public hearing open for 2 weeks and then reserve decision this evening to work on the CNR's decommissioning plan and get Ms. Cruz an answer. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Moriarty, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? We are reserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Town Board application, public hearing, Craig Hink, SCZ 2022-029, west side of Fifth Avenue, County Route 13A, approximately 378.9 feet north of Bartow Street, Bay Shore, 1420 and 1424 North Fifth Avenue. Applicant requests a change of zone from Residence A to Industrial 1 in order to construct a mini storage warehouse. Site plan modifications are requested as part of the application. Good evening. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Raymond Justo, 715 South Country Road, Bay Shore, New York. On behalf of the applicant is Craig Hink. He's with me here tonight. He's a contract vendee for the premises known as 1420, 1424 Fifth Avenue. And as stated, this is an application to change the zone from Residence A to Industrial 1, which, as I will highlight to the best I can, we think this is the highest and best use of the property and in character with the surrounding area. Unfortunately, I learned just tonight that our civil engineer, Craig Lehat, is seriously ill, and he has ambulatory problems, could not make it here tonight. So I'm going to do the best I can with my client to try to answer any site-specific questions that you may have. I did not anticipate that he would not be here, and I apologize for that. I also thought he was having a mounted site plan brought. I just learned that he can't make it. So again, I'll try to do the best I can. If we need to.
So do you want to keep this date, or do you want to?
No, I would like to continue, and if
Go
we
right
have
ahead.
questions we can't ask, we can either supply them or we'll do the best we can.
Okay.
The existing property, it has two single-family residences on it, and it's approximately 53,852 square feet. I actually walked the property yesterday, and it is, for lack of a better term, an eyesore. It appears that this property is already being used or has been used by the current owner and prior owners, I believe, as some type of outdoor storage. There are a multitude of cars on the property. As you can see from the site plan, the property is a flag-shaped lot that runs from the west side of Fifth Avenue to the east side of North Clinton. And the pole part of the flag runs to North Clinton, and the other part behind the property are two residences as well. To the north of the property, as I'll get into, is a disability learning center. But getting back to the property itself, there's debris throughout the property. The back of the property that backs up onto North Clinton, there's just a gate in front of the street that you can see through. And it's, again, you see garbage, you see debris, you see trailers, you see equipment laying and strewn about the property. So we believe what we're going to propose is a much better improvement to the existing conditions at the property and better for the surrounding neighbors. The property itself, the area that's in, is replete with industrial uses. Just to the north and adjacent to the property that runs along the entire northern border of the property is again, that learning disability school. And the property is on Fifth Avenue. It's a very high traffic area. Almost all the properties north of the property along the west side of Fifth Avenue are industrial. There may be one or two homes peppered in there, not many. And all have been, as far as I know, are deemed to be industrial one or have been converted to industrial one zoning use. The property next door, in fact, it has a large, I would say it's almost a 3-story structure that's on the property. Our proposal would not be any higher than that property that is, again, north and adjacent to our property. Again, I can get into some of the site specifics if you'd like. What I have been able to ascertain by reviewing the plans is that a change of zone from Residence A to Industrial 1 will result in us meeting all zoning requirements except a slight variance with respect to landscaping buffer. The landscaping buffer along the residential area will be 15 feet. We'll meet all code requirements. I believe that in working with the planning department, the structure was designed in such a fashion to have less buffer along the learning disability side of the property. And that is also the side where I believe we were instructed to move the structure closer to the learning disability center and give more of a buffer, not only of landscaping, but the building itself from any of the residences. I think it was set up that way. It is going to be a superior architecture structure, which would allow us to have 100% FAR. We're going to have slightly less than 100%. The building itself is going to be a 2-story building with a full basement. It's not necessarily bad, but the grading of the property is such that a portion of the basement is underground and a portion is above ground. And again, it will not be any higher than the structure just to the north of the property. And again, I think the site plan speaks for itself, but if you have any more specific questions on the site and its layout, my client is here and I'm here. Hopefully we'll be able to answer those questions for you. What I asked my client to do, I think it's very helpful. We commissioned a feasibility study, which I'd like the record to reflect that I just handed out to the board. I also emailed this study to Sean earlier today to make it part of the record. And it is prepared by a well-known appraisal company that they do these reports as a matter of course. And I would, again, I think it speaks for itself, but I would like to read into the record some of the findings, and I'll be very brief with regard to that, but I think it's very relevant. On page 16 of the report, it states the subject property is located on Fifth Avenue, which is a high-traffic road often used by commercial vehicles. This type of roadway has a negative impact on the value of residential use real estate. Industrial use properties such as the proposed zoning change would permit benefit from such a roadway as it permits large trucks good access to major highways in the area, such as Long Island Expressway and Sunrise Highway. The property to the immediate north of the subject property has a commercial use. The buildings on the property are office in nature and are used for educational purposes. Approximately 241 feet to the north of the subject property are industrial use properties located in Industrial 1 zoning. The precedents exist on the same street for this type of zoning district. To the west of the subject property and the opposite side of North Clinton Avenue is also industrial use properties in an Industrial 1 zoning district. Approximately 342 feet to the south of the subject property and on the opposite side of Fifth Avenue is a Business 1 zoning district with retail uses. In conclusion, the proposed Industrial 1 zone would permit development that conforms to similar uses in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. The subject property meets the requirements for minimum lot area and minimum lot width. Improvements built within the maximum building height and maximum lot coverage area would represent a legal and conforming use. And lastly, on page 32, another conclusion is reached with regard to a highest and best use analysis was done in this report, and they reach a conclusion on page 32 that based on their analysis, the highest and best use of the site is what we have proposed. So I submit that report into the record, and again, I think it speaks for itself.
We'll make that part of the record.
Thank you. I've also asked my client to put together a market study because I know there may be some concerns. We hear of so many storage facilities going up. I personally own some storage facilities, so I'm very familiar with them. And
Mr. So can I mean, you're hitting on a point, not so much the value, but here's my major concern with this project before you get to it. Maybe you can address it as you're speaking. I understand there's a hodgepodge of different types of uses, but majority of the uses, if not all the uses touching the property, are in fact residential. And to go and put an industrial zone up against the residential, the school is there, but the school is in a residential zone. People bought houses, granted on Fifth Avenue where you said there's traffic, I understand all that, but they bought a residence knowing that there's residential zoning next to them. What's your argument to go from residential zoning against houses into an industrial zone? That's my question.
yeah, well, even on North Clinton, there's industrial uses, even though there's homes peppered
I've
throughout.
acknowledged that there are hodgepodge zoning. I don't know who
Avenue
proved that I did not.
as well.
But I just,
So the property next door, even if it is residential, it is a 3-story commercial building and rather large commercial building. Actually, behind the property as well is another disability center. So they're replete throughout the area. And I think one of the reasons why I asked for this feasibility study is to answer that exact question that you have. Does it fit within the character of the area? And I think that study, if you don't want to take my word for it, and what our beliefs are, obviously, and our opinions are, that's an expert report that I've asked my client to put together and pay for to show you and to hopefully answer that question that you just had.
I just received it. I'll read through it. But my major concern with this whole thing, I mean, self-storage tend to have lower use and a lower intensity in terms of people coming in and out. But if somebody in the town of Islip bought a residential piece of property, zone next to them is residential, we're asking to jump not to general service or transition or something where it's in a house, or it's a medical office or whatever. We're asking to go to an industrial and to protect those homeowners' rights who bought property with the understanding that there was a residential zone next to them.
Right.
I want to hear your thoughts on how we get to
especially with
industrial.
respect to this property, even though there's 2 residences on it, I don't believe it's been used for residential purposes for a long time, and it seems to be already outdoor storage use of the property. And if I was a neighbor there that had been, and my understanding it's been like that for 40 years or so, I would have been complaining about that. This was a really major problem. What we're proposing is much better than what's already there. We think is an eyesore, and aesthetically, it's not going to match what we're going to do. And we're going to have, fences. We're going to have security. We're going to improve it. We actually have a rendering here that I asked my client to put together, and that's viewing the property from Clinton. And if you were to walk the property as it is now, we submit that that's a much better use of the property than the existing use, which has been in that condition for quite some time.
Thank you. I mean, I still have my concerns. I understand
Yeah,
your points, but
I understand. And part of a zoning change is to tell you that we think that because of the particular character of the area and some special circumstances, that we think that you should give the change a zone. So lastly, a market study. The reason I asked my client to do that was because there's always a concern, do we need another storage facility? And obviously in Bay Shore, it's one of the hottest markets for storage, and there's many multifamily housing going up, Tritech, et cetera. So that study, which is done by probably the #1 company in the United States for doing self-storage market studies, is pretty relevant. And I just really quickly, because again, I submitted it into the record, I think it speaks for itself, but they start off by saying on page 9 that 70% of the time in their reports, they do not recommending going forward. Notwithstanding that, they eventually reach a determination on page 11 of the agreement that they would recommend that the developer use this site for self-storage. So they're going against their normal 70% rate of not recommending. They are recommending. And finally, on page 36 of the report, it states that the subject area within a 2-mile radius is undersupplied for self-storage. So we think we're also filling a community need for self-storage, as is reflected in this expert report. So in conclusion, and again, we're here to answer any questions you have. We don't believe it's going to have a detrimental impact. We think it's in character with the area. The existing use is not beneficial to the community. And I think someone may have mentioned it. Self-storage is a very benign use. Traffic is incredibly low, no noise. I own a few. We've never received complaints from the community. And we do think it fits a particular need of the community. So with that, I'll stop my presentation.
We do not have any cards on this. Did anybody come in and wish to be heard? Not seeing anyone, I'm going to turn to Mr. Colgan to give us a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As stated by the applicant, this application proposes a self-storage facility on 2 lots currently zoned residential. Each has a certificate of occupancy for a single-family dwelling, one which was built in 1923 and the other in 1961, according to town records. The property to the north is zoned residential with a school building. Properties to the east and south and immediate west are residential. Across the street on North Clinton Avenue to the west are other industrial properties. The staff has concerns that residential properties being rezoned to industrial between 2 residentially zoned properties and across the street from other residences. While industrial zoning is around this area, ideally there would be a transitional zoning between residential and industrial, as they are generally not compatible. The staff can find no specific distinguishing factors such as the historic use of the property or other precedents established that would lend support to this very change. The site plan shows 2 buildings, one with overhead doors facing residences. The western building does not meet the minimum 50-foot required setback from the northern and southern property lines, and the eastern building doesn't meet the setback from the north. The proposed FAR is 0.989, which is permissible if the applicant meets certain criteria. This proposal doesn't comply with the criteria. The 25% overall landscaping requirement is not met. The elevations show a considerable amount of stucco or drive-it, where 10% maximum is permitted, and 15% of the facade is not dedicated to windows. And there are limited horizontal distinguishing elements, such as a decorative cornice. So we would have to work with the applicant should this application move forward without a variance. The details are missing on the renewable energy requirement. A variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals will be necessary for the setbacks and the overall FAR if the applicant can't achieve the requirements for the maximum of 1 FAR. In addition, the buffers are all 15 feet in depth instead of the required 25 feet. While self-storage buildings are generally low in traffic use, they are bulky, and the board will have to weigh whether this use fits in the nature and character of this area, particularly in light of displacing residential zoning with industrial zoning among other residential uses. Based on that, the staff would recommend that the board reserve decision tonight to review any emails that may have been received, as well as materials submitted by the applicant tonight.
You want to speak to any, I mean, I had certainly have the concerns about residential property being next to it, but Mr. Colgan has raised a lot of issues in terms of not even complying with the site plan as it would be required.
Well, the only thing I can say is that I was recently involved with this application. I was never privy to the meetings that may have occurred prior to this hearing tonight. So based on everything that Sean just said, I'm actually a little surprised. So, Greg, do you have anything you'd like to?
No, excuse me. Oh, my name is Craig Hank. I'm a contract vendee. As my attorney had indicated before, Craig Leahat, who did our site drawings for us, is unfortunately not available tonight. But in previous meetings, myself and Sean had met, and there were some discussions about some of the requirements, that we would have to try to meet. And we thought he had taken these into consideration, but unfortunately, since he's not here, we would have to revisit those and any other concerns that the town might have. The only thing I can say is that with the condition of the existing property right now, it is an absolute blight. So granted, it might be considered residential property, and maybe the school is considered residential property, but it's not being used as residence. So this would be a huge, improvement to the property. And in addition, just to the south, there's one or two properties that are residents but are vacant and boarded up. And, who's going to buy them if this place looks this way? So it might be zoned residential, but if it's not improved, nobody's going to want to be there. So, it's one hash,
Mr. Brown?
Right, yeah, and there was a couple points I had. The asking to put this next to residential is one thing. If the property was where you could go in there as of right on industrial one property and do this, but there's a lot of things that just don't fit with your buffers and setbacks and things like that, which is, that's what my concern is. So before I can even think about the project, I have to go through the things that, the buffers and that don't fit right now to look at. So,
and again, like my friend Steve Berlino said, this is not my first rodeo either. So
Right.
I don't think I would have reached this point if I had known of these concerns. So I would respectfully request that we maybe push this off and we re-meet, and we have Mr. Leahat meet again, who's not here tonight to answer a lot of these questions and how he came up with this design. But I would like the opportunity to revisit this with the
Right.
planning
Well,
department.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a motion, after being recognized by the chairman, that we keep the public hearing open so your architect can come back. So I'm not going to put a date on or 2 weeks or something like that. I'll keep the record open so that you can bring more testimony back here
Right.
after we have time to review it. And my recommendation is going to be the reserve decision tonight. So planning staff and the feasibility studies and that are board members up here have the time to go through it.
Right.
So
We have no
I'm going to turn
objection.
it back to the chairman first to see if he has any other questions, and then I'll ask to be recognized for a motion after that.
The only thing I would just add, and I would just ask Sean about it when we just pulled it up on the site plan, I believe maybe 2 properties away, if not the next property over, somebody's actually building a brand new residential house. I know we said that nobody's going to live in that area, but there's a new construction. I'm looking at the picture right now on Google Maps, but so just take all that in consideration. My concerns are, again, it's a low intensity use, but there are people bought residential properties, granted it's on Fifth Avenue, but they bought it on Fifth Avenue knowing they were in a residential property next door to them. So in addition to considering all the things that Sean raised when you have that meeting, let's also, when you come back before us, let's talk about that. And I will read the feasibility study and everything else that was submitted to see what was mentioned in there as well.
All right.
Is there anything further from Mr.
I have
Matamor?
one observation from Mr. Justo that, and I'm familiar with Clinton Avenue, I'm very familiar with Fifth Avenue. It's certainly a gateway from Southern State Parkway down to Bay Shore. and yet you're giving us a rendering that shows it from Clinton Avenue. That's,
from Fifth Avenue. That's the Fifth Avenue.
well, that's
Oh,
not what he said.
I misspoke. I misspoke.
Oh, all right. Well, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I was going to say, certainly we needed to.
I'm glad
get
you
a-
picked up on that. I misspoke.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to point that out, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to come back and see if some of these things can be made sense of. But I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matamore. Anything further from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
Not at this time.
Is there a motion? Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion that we keep the hearing open and reserve decision tonight.
It's a motion by Mr. Brown to keep the public hearing open and reserve decision. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Moriarty. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions were reserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Town Board application, public hearing, Costco Wholesale Corporation as successor by merger to Price Corporation, CZ 2022-030, northeast corner of Beacon Drive and Sunrise Highway, State Route 27, Holbrook, 125 Beacon Drive. Applicant requests a modification of covenants and restrictions associated with TC 5286 to decrease the landscaped area along Beacon Drive in order to expand an existing single-use bulk retail establishment by 18,372 square feet. Site plan modifications required as part of this application. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Philip Butler with the law firm of Farrell Fritz PC, 100 Motor Parkway, Hauppauge, New York, for the applicant. I'm joined here tonight by JP Andrews and John Alvarado, representing the applicant Costco. Also with me is Anthony Stancanelli of Furnesis Engineering and John Harder of Atlantic Traffic. As usual, I've handed out my usual tome of materials for the record. For reference, Exhibit 5 is the most recent version of the site plan that was just submitted in hard copy to the town yesterday. The one modification from the prior iteration that you might have seen is that the southwest corner of the building was chamfered to maintain a code compliant setback. And in doing so, we lost approximately 15 square feet from the proposed addition that I'll discuss. So the project site is the existing 130,000 square foot Costco retail center at the northwest junction of Sunrise Highway and Nichols Road in Holbrook. The facility was built in 1993, so it's approximately 3 decades old at this point. As often happens with retail centers of a certain age, it is now outmoded and too small to accommodate the existing services and products that Costco sells. So primarily more space is needed to upgrade and modernize the pharmacy, the administrative offices, the storage and bathrooms, and of course there will be some additional retail floor space. The proposal is to expand the existing building footprint by approximately 18,000 square feet to raise the total square footage of the building to 148,000 square feet. It's important to note that there will be no new services as part of this expansion. All of the existing services on site are going to remain the same. The objective, again, is not to increase membership, but rather to modernize the site and also to allow for more stock to be stored on site and sold on site. In fact, Costco typically does not see an increase in membership as a result of these expansions. The idea, as it was put by my client, is to sell more to the same customers. As expanded, the building will still be less than the maximum floor area permitted by code, which would be approximately 161,000 square feet. The expanded building will also comply with the minimum 25-foot front yard setback on Beacon Drive. In fact, the setback will be approximately 29 feet from the property line, and then there'll be another couple of feet between the property line and the sidewalk before you get to the curb in Beacon Drive. The added benefit of the project would be that, in theory, this is going to reduce the number of truck trips to the facility, as they'll be able to store more stock on the premises and won't need as many deliveries. The relief required for the project is relief from prior covenants imposed in 2017 that limit the building size to 133,000 square feet, imposed a 60-foot buffer to Beacon Drive, and which accommodated a parking relaxation for 656 stalls, whereas the parking requirement back then was greater. We are adding 56 stalls as part of the proposal, raising the total number from 656 to 712. However, we will still require a parking relaxation of 136 stalls, or approximately 16% relaxation. We will also require a landscape relaxation of 10,864 square feet. 129,000 square feet roughly is required. This is a relaxation of approximately 8.4%. With respect to the landscape relaxation, my understanding is that there's been significant discussion with both planning and engineering about the expansion towards Beacon Drive. As a result, the original iteration of this plan was modified significantly to bring the building back from Beacon Drive. And the line of existing mature trees that is on Beacon Drive is going to be fully maintained. We've consulted an arborist and have an arborist letter who has confirmed that the trees can be maintained without damaging root systems as part of the construction. So we did look into the feasibility of actually standing by our word and maintaining that tree line as part of the project. And actually, if you look to Exhibit 8 of your materials, you can see the existing trees along this side of the property. It's actually a very robust line of trees. I assume that was intended to break up the side of the building, which although it is only about 30 feet tall, it is a fairly long building. So in addition to providing that buffer, it would also break up the appearance of the building. Again, the proposal will be to maintain that existing line of trees. After some discussion with my client, Costco is also willing to pay a mitigation fee. I know that is something that was discussed. I discussed it with Sean today. I'm somewhat unclear on how that mitigation fee is going to be calculated. However, based on the hearing earlier with FedEx, my understanding is the fee is calculated based on the landscaping deficiency. I would ask that it would be calculated the same way for Costco if this board is inclined to grant the application. Another added benefit here is that, across the street, we do have what was going to be potentially the Sirota Pines development. I don't believe that is going forward any longer, but basically, notwithstanding the fact that the building is getting closer to Beacon Drive, there is currently no one across the street who would be directly impacted by this. This is also the quiet side of the building. There is no activity that takes place on this side of the building. That will continue to be the case. The only thing that is going to be proposed on the side is emergency exits. So there won't be any customer entrances. There won't be any parking. So again, it will maintain effectively the same activity on that side of the structure. With respect to the parking relaxation, again, Costco does not expect that there will be a significant uptick in membership as a result of the expansion. Nevertheless, the parking was studied by Atlantic Traffic, and their findings, which are detailed in Exhibit 9 of your materials, indicate that there will be a peak demand of 596 stalls that will occur on Saturday. So there would be a reserve of approximately 116 stalls, or 16% of the provided parking. Taking the additional parking that is shared with Savers Thrift Store to the south, there are actually a total number of 846 stalls provided. The total peak between the two uses would be approximately 680 stalls, which would leave a true reserve of 166 stalls, or 20%. The choice to expand westward into the vacant portion of the property was made because expanding the building in any other direction would affect the loading areas or would reduce parking and impede traffic flow, especially if this is done in close to proximity to the fueling station, which is very busy. Basically, we're asking for a favorable recommendation on the modification of the covenants. I understand they have not yet been drafted, but obviously if this board is inclined to grant the application, our objective would be to review those internally and have a response before the board is prepared to vote on this at an upcoming meeting. And also we're asking for the relaxations previously stated. So with that, if the board has any specific questions, we can respond to them.
Thank you. We have nobody who signed up to speak. Did anybody come in and wish to be heard? Not seeing anyone. I'm going to go to Mr. Colgan, then we'll come back for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As stated by the applicant, this application proposes to expand an existing Costco bulk retail establishment. The applicant needs a modification of covenants for encroaching into the approximately 60-foot required landscaping buffer along Beacon Drive by covenant. The planning department was concerned with the proposed loss of landscaping, particularly the mature street trees that have been there for nearly 30 years. The street trees should be preserved if possible, and the staff would advocate for a mitigation fee in lieu of the landscaping that is being displaced by virtue of the covenant. Based on the town's fee schedule, the staff calculated that estimate to be about $91,000, give or take. With regards to the expansion itself, I think the staff is inclined to agree that no significant impacts with regards to parking or traffic are anticipated, as the use itself is already a destination, and Costco is not proposing new services within the expansion. It's just proposing additional inventory. So we don't think the additional expansion is going to be a draw in and of itself. So that being said, we did announce that the network was been down for the town, so we weren't able to explore the existing covenants, which I think are a little more elaborate than what we typically see, because this is a unique use. So the staff would ask that the board reserve decision so we can work out the covenants with the applicant prior to bringing this back, and they'll still be on track for the January 27th change of zone.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my only concern with this project is the tree line on Beacon. Now, how far toward the trees is the expansion going to come?
So I actually just asked my consultant that question because I wasn't exactly sure. So I don't know exactly how close the building is going to be to those trees, but that's also why I asked the question about the root systems and maintaining the trees. So we did consult an arborist specifically for that purpose, and we were assured that with the tree protection plan, the extension can be constructed without materially damaging those trees.
Right.
So
So we don't know how close we're coming to it?
12 and 15 feet.
12 to 15 feet. And is there a report from the arborist?
Yes, there is a letter.
Can we get that submitted to
Yes,
us? Okay.
And to Mr. Brown's point, if we get that submitted, we can ask our landscape architect to take a look at that and review it. So my only comment is on this, I know you mentioned the FedEx application earlier. The only thing that I see as different on this one is that there was a covenant for an additional buffer there, which is disappearing. So you need to get rid of that covenant. So there is a higher percentage that's required on this lot. I think that's where the planning staff has come up with that number from. So I just put that out there for, if it was a brand new project before us without a covenant for an extra buffer, I think you're 100% correct. But when this was agreed to and this was constructed, I think there was a covenant put in place for that extra buffer that's being lost.
Yeah, and I understood the distinction. I did discuss that with Sean earlier. But also we couldn't exactly figure out why that 60-foot buffer was imposed, because the building in terms of massing is not terribly large. It is long, but it's only about 30 feet tall. So if the reason for that 60 feet was to reduce massing, I think now that you have those mature trees there and those are going to be remaining, bringing that building forward is not really going to create a wall effect on Beacon. The only other reason I could have thought that would have been imposed is if there was some concern about what might go in across Beacon Drive, if that was going to be residential or some kind of other sensitive use. But apparently there's no record of that being the case. So notwithstanding that the buffer was imposed, we don't really know what the board's reasoning was originally for imposing it. So I know we're asking now to remove it, but considering that there won't be any material impact on anybody on that side of the property, that's why we're asking to be treated effectively the same as FedEx in terms of calculating that fee.
Not the same as FedEx. You're asking to be treated differently because they don't have a covenant in place that requires that. So I understand your argument. If you can come back and find something that says, I don't know the history from back then and what the reasoning was, if there's anything on the record from back then, certainly we'd be willing to consider it. But right now there's a covenant in place that does ask for that extra buffer to be there.
Understood.
Which is landscaping.
Well, in concept, Costco is open to the mitigation fee, so
Yeah.
we will settle on the calculation.
And I think, and I don't speak for myself, but I haven't heard any complaints about the project itself in terms of expanding it. The main issue is the trees. We can get past that. I just don't want to approve this for you that way. And then other people who have covenants in place for extra landscaping come back to us and say, well, let's follow the Costco model.
Understood.
So that's where I'm at. Are there any further questions from the board? Anything further from the applicant?
No.
Is there a motion? Mr. Moriarty, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make a motion to close the hearing this evening, or at least should we keep the
14 days.
We're going to keep it open, keep the public hearing open for 14 days to accept email feedback from local constituents. So we won't close the hearing this evening, but I would make a motion to reserve decision.
So motion by Mr. Moriarty to leave the public hearing open for 14 days, then close it and reserve decision this evening. Is there a second? Second by I'll go Mr. Bruno. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions were reserved. Thank you.
Thank you and happy holidays.
Site plan modification decision item, Darshan Shah, SP 2014-059, northeast corner of 5th Avenue, County Route 13 and Spur Drive North, number 365, Bayshore, New York, 11706. Applicant requests buffer relaxation in connection with the previously approved set of planning board conditions for a convenience store and gasoline service station. Good evening to the applicant.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the board. planning representatives. Kevin O'Brien from O'Brien Law PC, 462 Sagamore Avenue in East Williston, New York, here in connection with this application representing the applicant. As was noted by the call of the calendar, we're here seeking a relaxation, buffer relaxation with respect to previously approved site plan and an operating gasoline service station. The sort of unique little situation we have with this particular piece of property is located at 365 Spur Drive North, which is the northeast corner of Fifth Avenue, Bayshore, and Spur Drive, just a little bit north. And there's other service stations like it in the area. But the northeast corner of the actual parcel of property, there's an easement which exists on that portion of the property, which benefits the property to the north. So our building goes, close to that portion, but if you look at the site plan, you'll see that there's that little corner over there, which is subject to an easement. That easement was recorded against the property in 1969 and is operated continuously as an easement against the property and utilized by the property to the north since 1969. There was a site plan that was approved in 1990 for some changes that were made to the property at that particular time and maintaining that particular easement over there. We did contact the property owner to the north to see if it could be eliminated, but we were unsuccessful in so doing. The site has been operating. The site plan approval, which we previously had, was in connection with the conversion of the service space to a convenience store operation. It has been operating as such. Canopy has been there. The site has been there. It's basically upgraded landscape-wise, facade-wise, interior-wise. So there were substantial improvements that were made, but we cannot put the landscaping on there because one thing, there's a fence there. The property owner to the north will not allow us to do so. So we have landscaped it, but just not to the extent that if we could utilize that full parcel of property. So we have agreed that should that easements no longer become necessary or not utilized, we're certainly willing to go and re-landscape that area, as was previously proposed. But we've attempted, we've made diligent efforts, but they did not want to relinquish that easement. So that's why we're here before the board this evening to basically really maintain what currently exists, what has existed basically since 1969, as well as the improvements that were made in 1990 and any of the improvements that we made recently, but not any improvements to the footprint of the building or anything along those lines. They were really just simply interior modifications, facade modifications, and the like. So with that in mind, we're seeking the board's favorable discretion and willing to enter into the covenants and restrictions that, should it become available in the future, by all means, we landscape that particular area. I mean, that area is not necessary for the operation of our business, and the party that is most affected by this is the party that's actually utilizing the easement area. So with that in mind, I would just, reserve the right to respond to any questions, or if there are any.
Not a public hearing, so I don't think you have to worry about that.
Okay, no interested observers. Okay.
Okay. So why don't we go to Mr. Gonzalez for a report, then we'll come back if there are any questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application was previously heard on February 7th, 2019, so it's been a little while, COVID and everything, for a public hearing on a buffer relaxation for an existing gas station and convenience store. Decision was reserved to allow the applicant to work with staff on issues pertaining to the existing easement that is in effect with the subject property and the adjacent property to the north. As a brief recap for the board, this property and the adjacent property to the north maintain an access easement in the northeast corner of this property, as you can see on the site plan before you, which has existed and is recorded since 1969. That easement is the reason that the subject property is requesting a buffer relaxation, as they cannot terminate that easement and plant a portion of the required buffer area, as the adjacent property will not consent to it. For the applicant to attempt litigation and work to terminate that easement, it would delay, I believe it was the cash bond that is currently on the property that is being held because of this buffer relaxation. It's not the CO. For the convenience store indefinitely while that played out in the courts with no guarantee it could actually be terminated. So after discussion with the town attorney's office, it was determined that covenants and restrictions be recorded against the subject property that states should that easement ever be terminated, the applicant or any owner thereafter is required to plant the remaining buffer. Currently, it is planted with arborvitae in very good condition, and given the fact that the only benefactor to that buffer is the property owner who will not terminate that easement, the buffer relaxation subject to that covenant has merit. So based on the above, staff recommends the board grant the application subject to standard conditions with the following stipulations. One being that the applicant record at the Suffolk County Clerk a covenant and restriction on the property that should the existing easement between the subject property and the property to the north be extinguished, the required buffer shall be fully planted per the originally approved site plan. A draft executed copy is attached. And then 2, the buffer relaxation is based on the site plan before the board tonight, prepared by Graham Associates, last revised June 7, 2018.
Thank you. Does the applicant agree?
Yes, yes, we do. They have been executed. I think they just, probably need the final approval from the town attorney's office before they're actually recorded. But yes, we do agree.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Does the applicant want anything further?
Nothing further.
Is there a motion?
Mr.
Brown?
Chairman? Yes, Mr. Chairman, based on the staff report and the stipulations presented by Mr. Gonzalez, I make a motion to grant the application.
Motion by Mr. Brown to grant the application subject to the covenants and restrictions. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Cruz. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? The application is granted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good evening.
It's a motion by Mr. Moriarty to adjourn, second by Mr. Matamore. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? We're adjourned.